The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the host and its guest and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the company. Examples of analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based only on very limited and dated open source information. Assumptions made within this analysis are not reflective of the position of the company. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast, Jay Allen.
Hi, this is Jim from Safety Wars. Before we start the program, I want to make sure everyone understands that we often talk about OSHA and EPA citations, along with some other regulatory actions from other agencies, legal cases, and criminal activity. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Proposed fines are exactly that, and they are often litigated, reduced, or vacated. We use available public records, news accounts, and press releases. We cannot warranty or guarantee the details of any of the stories we share, since we are not directly involved with these stories, at least not most of the time. Enjoy the show.
This show is brought to you by Safety FM.
And from the border of liberty and prosperity, the highway to the north, this is Safety Wars for Tuesday, May 9th, 2023. We are waiting for a guest to come on to the show. A very dear friend of mine. Today is a very somber day for her, and she is going to talk about that. So, in the event, again, we're doing technology, and everyone knows I'm new here. We can't get her on. We will re-record her interview. I'm going to go off the air, going to re-record it. We'll be back in a little bit. So how's everybody doing out there today? I'm trying to get her on. All right. So, what are we going to be talking about today? It's a very somber situation here. Basically, 27 years ago, doesn't seem that I feel old. Today, Versace, one of the second to last Versace murder took place. Basically, the whole story is this. Been a lot of movies, TV movies, and everything else. So, essentially, we have this guy, Andrew Cunanan. For whatever reason, a serial killer. 5 people he killed. And I'm reading from the Washington Post from July 17th, 1997. For unknown reasons, he went on a killing spree and killed full, ending with Versace, who was a fashion designer. His name brand is still out there. I believe his family is still in the business, so to speak. And so basically he went out and here it is. All right. He killed a man named Jeffrey Trail. Right. And then he went on and killed another gentleman, David J. Madsen, in Minneapolis. Right. And then he ended up killing another guy, Lee Miglin. Then he went out and killed William Reese, but it was also almost through a strange set of circumstances. It could have very easily have been by the guest that we're going to have on, Alicia Bjornson, and I'll let her tell her story and her thoughts on this. And then eventually he went to and he killed Gianni Versace shortly thereafter, after he stole William Reese's vehicle. And basically that's what happened here. So let me see with Alicia, what's going on here.
Good to see you, Jim.
Hey.
Thank you for inviting me.
Boy, it's nice to see you. I don't recall. Hold on, let me see. Can you hear me now?
I can. Can you hear me?
Okay, this is going to be a little different because I am hearing. Let me see if I can do that. Okay. All right. I think this stream is good enough for us. And you know what? I always do a backup here. We're going to put you on voice memo here. Okay. So I just briefly, welcome to Safety Wars. You are like our first live guest here, believe it or not.
All right.
And you are on live, not to make you nervous, but we are on 3 Facebook channels, YouTube Live, Twitter Live, Twitch, Telegraph, LinkedIn, and the OneStream channel. So,
well, thank you.
You got everything. Okay, hold on. All right. Yeah, I did a very. I had the leader of the anti-global warming movement here, global climate change movement, Lord Monckton, and I was in a nervous wreck because I didn't have it on backup, and I was relying on all the equipment. I was like, oh man, this is nerve-wracking, and it all worked out okay. So I went into right. Let me teach you a little bit of history here for Alicia. I knew this had happened or almost had happened. You had experience with this situation. I didn't go into on the program what exactly we had discussed, what exactly your story was. But I went over briefly what happened with Andrew Cunanan, with the other 4 victims, and then and everything. How this happened was today, Alicia posted something about the murder of her friend, I'm kicking myself, William Reese, right, on her Facebook page. And I said, son of a gun, I wanted to talk about workplace violence this week, and at least one day. And this was a segue, unfortunately, into the whole subject on workplace violence. So so people always say, well, what does this have to do with safety? Well, guess what? Workplace violence is a safety issue. It is an OSHA recordable issue. We know what that is as safety professionals. If you're not, go check my Saturday program from a couple of weeks ago, where I go into all of what that is. And basically, last week we had fall protection, construction fall protection. 400 to 500 people, depending on the year, die in construction due to falls from height. We have a whole week dedicated to it. Well, about the same number of people die in workplace violence issues every year. We don't have a week dedicated to them. And I think that, no, I can't make the agencies do things, but I can make myself do something. So I wanted to talk about workplace violence, your experience with this, and you had some very, when we spoke before, you had some very pointed thoughts on it. Here's some statistics for you, right? 23% of employees worldwide have experienced some form of workplace violence. 481 homicides in the United States in 2021 in the workplace. Wow. That includes 387 workplace shootings, which led to death. We know that at least 25% of these go unreported in violation of OSHA, or they're public employees and they work outside the OSHA rubric outside the OSHA scheme, 50% involves people in the medical field. Pretty startling, right? Women experience 30,000 sexual assaults at work in this country a year. 60.4 million Americans are bullied at work. Going on, and it goes on and on and on, these statistics here, and we'll get into some of this other stuff. I could go on for an hour here. I have an hour worth of talking, which Alicia is not surprised I would have an hour's worth to talk about, right? So I've known Alicia since the late 1990s, just after this happened. So I went over some of the brief history. What happened that day? 27 years ago today. It's amazing.
26.
26.
Yeah.
What exactly happened with this? If you're care, it's whatever you're comfortable with. I'm not gonna.
It's one of these days where the day had proven to be normal at the site. We'd had a group of elementary school kids from an adjacent community come, and what they had all been eyeing was Mr. Miglin's car.
Let's back this up a little bit. Alicia was correct me if I'm wrong on the title, one of the state historians at a historical site in New Jersey. What was the name of that site?
Fort Mott State Park.
Fort Mott State Park. And here's a little bit of trivia for you. There's a little bit of Delaware in New Jersey, on the New Jersey side of the river. And Delaware owns the entire Delaware River up to the shoreline in New Jersey, basically. And there's a cemetery that's associated with Fort Mott, which is a historical site in New Jersey. And this is the site of right?
Yeah, the Finns Point National Cemetery is a national cemetery that was originally part of the military base. And when the park became a park, it stayed part of the Veterans Administration. So it remained a federal site. It's a half mile away from the fort.
Right.
And our colleagues at the time worked fairly closely. It was administered by Beverly National Cemetery.
Right. Okay. So that's the whole setting here. And there was a group of children that had come to the park.
Yes, they had been coming for a tour. And in the parking lot at that time had been this very shiny green car. And it stuck out because it wasn't from New Jersey. It happened to be much fancier than most people, and it was the color of the tractors that we see around here on a regular basis.
That was a green 1994 Lexus from the previous victim, Lee Miglin, from Chicago, basically. Yeah.
And I think what really was so striking is I grew up in Illinois outside of Chicago, and you start hearing the story unfold from what had happened in Chicago, but nobody knew where this car had ended up. And it turned out to be where we were working. So that's part of the backstory. And the unusual feature was at the end of the day, we just didn't see our colleague. We go home, we leave about the end of the day, and it's not till the story starts unfolding, three hours or so after work, that there has been a horrible tragedy.
Right.
You just don't know it, but there were other people that were at the site. We weren't the full complement of staff, but I think what happens within the investigation for this is that the real striking thing is you don't really have email, you have no Facebook, no Instagram, no social media. EasyPass wasn't common. Right. So there were a lot of features that investigations probably from a law enforcement side, and I can't really speak to how law enforcement does investigations, but the interview process trying to figure out what people was very different because you didn't have Ring cameras or anything like that.
Right. Well, in 1997, you had the advent of cell phones. I believe I had a cell phone in 97. Actually, probably at about this time in 97 is when I got my first cell phone. That's a story for another day. And no email. I had just gotten email in 96, 97. No, 97, I got email right around this time. You were probably in the same boat, right? Most people, no social media. that most you had chat rooms on. I was on CompuServe or AOL or something like that. I
Mindspring?
think Mindspring you were on, right?
Yes.
I remember that. I think you still have that email address.
No,
Uh,
sadly
yeah,
I don't. I'm not sure it totally exists any longer. But I had a
right.
pager. That was the funny thing. I don't think I had come over to um, cell phone yet at that time.
Right. Easy Pass, as I recall, did not become common in New Jersey until like '99,
Mhm.
roughly, because I remember
Perhaps.
I got it in New York because I was
Hmm.
doing a lot of work in New York, and uh, yeah, I was doing a lot of work in New York, and I got Easy Pass because of it was much easier to deal with stuff, and so you're dealing with a totally different time. You even had mentioned you were shocked that the Washington Post tracked you down to write their article, which I read from before you
Yes.
came on the air.
Okay.
So I guess I don't know if I don't even know if the new reporters would have that skill set how to do that back in today. Back in the day,
Yeah.
that was different. So this was like the last major case. It seems major before all this technology came in. That was documented. There's been movies and everything else. So, what else did you want to talk about with what happened?
As you had been hearing of the story unfolding, because that had been in the news prior to Bill's murder, you had heard some of the story on national news. But since Bill was a federal employee, suddenly you have a higher level as an observer and being nearby. Suddenly you have federal authorities involved, not just local authorities trying to string things together. Um, I think the saddest thing is, how does this happen? When you're in the role of public service for Bill, he was the caretaker of the cemetery for over 20 years. And everything was done with such care that if somebody wanted to call or was looking for a veteran that was buried there, um, you had the opportunity to speak to somebody who knew and probably had spent time working with the families for a burial that was there. And he was just such an exceptional human being.
Yeah, I'm reading this article here. From my understanding, his wife had a major health issue, from what I recall,
Yes,
and his son was a special needs person.
that's
Uh,
correct.
and basically the care and of both of them had been severely negatively impacted uh, by this whole tragedy. Obviously, with any tragedy like this, the family would be the family is impact. It's a horrible thing. I can't imagine going through something like this. I don't ever want to be able to imagine going anything through this. And within 3 to 4 years, the family didn't exist anymore, basically, is what from what I recall. Is that correct? Or
I believe, this is, as you come to this time of the year, each year you think about this and you just try to remember um, what we sometimes take for granted now or what makes a bad day. And you always think, a bad day is when you go to a place you love to be and you don't make it home. I That's a bad day at work, and even at life, and you just have to stop and think about what you're grateful for, and remember with gratitude, and then try to remember those that mattered. And Bill is someone who mattered.
yeah, you always used to talk about him, and I would have loved to meet him with that. No, over here, and I know how did your life change after this with him, or your working life, I should say. With it, I know that there were protocols put into place. And there were protocols put into place over 10 years probably after this happened.
Yeah,
So
I think people became more aware of when you were solo, how about perhaps whether it was formal or informal, but how your supervisor addressed the fact that maybe you didn't need to be alone on a site at certain times. We had a bell at least on one of the doors so that if you were in a building, you would notice if somebody came in the backside of a structure. Um, It's one of the reasons when cell phones became more available. Just even today, you keep your phone nearby just in case you need it. And I don't think it's necessarily a paranoia, but you're just way more aware. And from those that we knew in law enforcement, they use the phrase BOLO, be on lookout, and just be smart and know what your surroundings are.
Absolutely. Now there's been, I think a lot of the industries, they have what's called a lone worker standard or lone worker protocol, depending on where you are, they call it different things. But essentially, I think this is one of the high profile cases that led to that. All these standards with lone workers, all different types of things out there, protocols and everything else with that. So you're obviously more aware of what's going on. No, you're retired now, but now you were always more aware of what was going on with security and everything else after this. There's been a lot of movies on this whole situation. I know you did a deep dive because you went through this, but you were potentially if the roles were slightly changed, you could have been this victim. You
take a look from that particular day. There were only two of us on the site that were actually park employees, and I think even as news was unfolding that day, that it is said that the murder had happened at the fort, not the cemetery. There was trying to get the information done, and that was just frightening, because when I started hearing that on the news and I started seeing the news, I knew that I was all right. How was my coworker? You didn't even think about what had been happening at the cemetery because they were sort of separate entities. Or was it a visitor, or was it somebody else who had been there? But as the story started to unfold in the deeper investigation, as they start asking questions, you suddenly realize that the vehicle that we had seen leave did not have our coworker in it, our colleague in it.
Yeah. So with all these movies and everything, was there anything you wanted to do to set the record straight? Because everybody, this is what I've seen on a couple of these shows and documentaries over the years. And by the way, this is like the first time we've had an in-depth conversation on this all these years, because it was very painful, obviously, with this. And we did not have a venue like Safety Wars live where we're reaching, potentially thousands of people here on this. Was there any? No, they concentrate on Versace, which they should. He was the victim here, one of the victims, and everything else, the most high profile one. And the other ones you could go and you could look up. I'm going to mention their names briefly here. In addition to William Reese and Gianni Versace, there was Lee Miglin, David Madsen, Jeffrey Trail. Was there anything that I don't know if you've seen any documentaries or anything, was there anything in there that you felt could have been done better, said better, anything that stuck out to you with any of these things out there? It was more or less how you mentioned it before, where it was they don't mention what a good person this was. And
he was just a family man who was so giving. He did historic reenactments as a Civil War, major Civil War buff, because he was caring for. At Finn's Point is such an exceptional site as a government cemetery. The soldiers that died at Peapatch Island were buried at Finn's Point. You had Union soldiers who died, so you have Union and Confederate soldiers in the same cemetery. You have some German POWs who are buried there as well as soldiers up, I believe, through the Gulf War. I don't recall right now if the cemetery is still active for those who could be buried, but you're cremated if you're in that cemetery now. Right. And now they've never replaced the caretaker. so you don't have the same type of personal contact when you are there. The fact that Bill was a family man who had his from the Vineland area where he was from, well known, well regarded, but sometimes the misinformation that was saying, well, maybe, as they're trying to draw theories, we're saying maybe people, that there was a connection. And until they found out that this was just a random connection, there were other theories that were coming up. Some of the other victims were homosexuals. And you sit and go, I just don't why that necessarily matters. Is it a hate crime? What is it? And perhaps I've not actually seen some of the documentaries because it's a little too close to home. I know that when I've been to Miami, you can go and they'll do tours to Versace's just to say, this is where somebody was killed. And people are executed. I think people deserve better, those that have died.
Yeah. I know with my experience with the anthrax cleanups, I've seen a couple of those documentaries. I've just had to turn them off, especially the last one. I believe it was on Netflix or one of those other. I think it was on Netflix. I just had to turn it off because it was all baloney here. I was like, this is not the way things happened here. And the victim, one of the victims who I'm very friendly with, won't even do interviews or anything with this because she still experiences a lot of PTSD and everything else because the things could have been managed a little bit better. As you know, for years you were there with me working when I was doing the political campaigns.
Yes.
And everything else. So you remember me on the political campaigns. So.
Yes.
And everything else. I mean, let's talk about that. Let's skip. What was my opinion on the Centers for Disease Control after the anthrax cleanups?
You thought it could be done better.
Yes.
Without pointing, fingers, there were things that seemed, with this not being my area of expertise, but saying, if you work together, you do the collaboration, you do the initiation, you can do something that causes a timeline that says, this is what you do. This is, your, how do you react? Disaster preparedness. Right. It's better to be prepared than to react. And, even from within my time working within parks, disaster preparedness on all levels, whether or not it's with weather issues, systems failure, just to know what's in your area or what happens in an emergency. Who do you call? What is your phone tree? Incident command, I think, would be the best way now as it would be called.
Oh. Mm-hmm. We lost the connection there for a second. Yeah, they're you and even with the disaster, I know you had gone to a lot of stuff on art for like museums and stuff.
Yes.
And things that are impacted by hurricanes or other natural disasters, restorative stuff. Well, everything's got to be planned out. Is basically it. You have to assess things, analyze, and act, as you say, the AAAs here.
Yeah.
But that's about it. Unless you want to add anything else, I wanted to get you on here just to set the record straight for the most part.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I think the main thing to do is just to remember all of the people that perished at the hands of Andrew Cunanan and to realize the impact because it goes forward, but just to make sure that you remember them and to give them some honor in thinking of them today. So
Absolutely.
Thank you for the opportunity.
No problem, Alicia. And that's it. So wanted to thank you. It's been a long time since I've seen you face to face on this. So
well, we'll get a chance to catch up sometime.
Absolutely. And that's Alicia Bjornson. No, you'll find her. If you want to get into contact with her, you'll be able to find her pretty easy, I guess. So,
or reach out to you. We'll chat soon.
Reach out to me. I'll get you into contact with her.